A new species of frog was discovered in Valle del Cauca, Colombia. The building was evacuated by the rescue team. New scientific data have been found on the importance of probiotics for the human microbiome. What do these three sentences have in common? That's what we are going to discover today. Today we're going to study passive voice. And I made this video for my students at Carbonell School. I hope you guys are doing great. Shout out to all of you. So if you thought that these three sentences sound like news, you are correct. The passive voice is used for the news. Here is an example of some local news from last year. This is from Colombia. And I want you to take a moment, stop the video, and try to find sentences in passive voice. And there are many examples of passive voice in this text. So stop the video and find them. Here they are. Have your time, analyze them, and see what they have in common. Alright, so when do we use the passive voice? If you thought we use it for the news, you are correct. We always use the passive voice when the focus of the sentence is on the object rather than on the subject. This means what is important when using passive voice is the recipient of the action and or the action itself, not the doer. It is more commonly used in formal or scientific writing. For example, when we say, new data have been found on the importance of probiotics for the human microbiome. Now, what is the structure? If we are trying to create a present simple passive sentence, then here is the structure. Let's analyze this example. New ideas are discovered every day. This is a passive voice sentence. It is the present simple passive. Here is the structure. First, the object or the recipient of the action, new ideas, then the verb to be. In any form, this depends on the tense, right? If the tense is present simple, then the verb to be has to be in present simple. Are. Then a verb in past participle. When we see this combination, the verb to be and a verb in past participle, we can be sure that we are using passive voice. It doesn't matter how the verb to be is conjugated. In this case, it is conjugated in present because we're talking about present simple passive. But we always have a verb in past participle after the verb to be. In this case, the verb discovered. Then we have optional. If we want to mention by whom, then we mention who discovered these new ideas. And then the complement. If you remember what we mentioned at the beginning, the doer or the agent, the subject of the sentence, is not important here. When we are using the passive voice, what is important is the object or the recipient of the action, not the agent, not the doer. So it is optional. If you want to mention who discovered these new ideas, it is optional. But the important thing is new ideas are discovered every day. Then past simple passive. Those properties were trespassed by robbers last summer. Here, the object is those properties. Here, maybe we're talking about some private buildings. And those, when we say those properties, we're talking about probably real estate. Verb to be, in this case, because we're talking about past simple, the verb to be has to be in past. And then a verb in past participle. Remember, when we have this combination, we are talking in passive voice. Those properties were trespassed by robbers last summer. Robbers is not what is important here. What is important is that those properties were trespassed. Right. Let's see what happens when we're talking about future simple passive or when we use modal verbs. Look, we have a new component here. What appears in this color is what not always goes in passive voice. In the case of the auxiliary, it depends on the tense that we are using. If we are using future simple, of course we use will, which is also a modal verb. Let's analyze this example. The mission will be achieved if soldiers follow the rules carefully. In this example, the new component is will, because we're talking in future. But if we analyze, we still have the two components that are necessary for using passive voice. in this case verb to be and a verb in past participle. The thing here is that the verb to be is in the basic form. Why? Because we are using a modal verb. Remember, when we use modal verbs, the following verb has to be in its basic form. That's why the verb to be in all of these four examples is just like that, be. This is the base form of the verb to be. It's not conjugated at all because we are using auxiliaries before the verb to be. Let's analyze this example. The project should be completed by all workers. What is important here is that the project should be completed by the workers of the company. Otherwise, maybe there is a consequence. The car must be left alone for cleaning. We can see this message in a car wash. What happens if we have the present perfect passive? Again, we have the auxiliary. Remember that for perfect tenses, we use the auxiliary have, has, or had in the case of past perfect passive. These examples were taken from the text that you analyzed at the beginning of this video about Colombian news. So, protests have been observed through the nation. Commitment to transparency and accountability has already been demonstrated by his administration. Talking about the president here. Again, we have the combination of the verb to be. In this case, it is conjugated in past participle because that is the way we conjugate it with perfect tenses. In this case, we have the present perfect. That's why we have and then the verb to be in past participle. And then the main verb of the sentence is also in past participle. But every time we see this combination, the verb to be and a verb in past participle, you can be sure that that sentence is in passive voice. The car had been crashed before the event was over. So for creating negatives, we only add a new component, in this case the word not, and it should go between the verb to be and the verb in past participle. New ideas are not discovered every day. Those properties were not trespassed by robbers last summer. Remember, the conjugation of the verb to be depends on the tense of the sentence. The mission will not be achieved if soldiers don't follow the rules carefully. The project should not be completed by all workers. The car must not be left alone for cleaning. So these are examples of negatives. The only new component is the word not. In the case of simple tenses, the word not should go between the verb to be and the main verb of the sentence. Remember, if we have this combination, we have the passive voice. Now, what happens when we have an auxiliary like will or any modal verb like should, must, might, etc.? The new component not should go between the auxiliary and the verb to be, then the main verb in past participle. And then with perfect tenses, here protests have not been observed through the nation. So the component not goes right after the auxiliary, just like when we use future or when we use modal verbs. Remember that perfect tenses have the auxiliary have, which is the verb haber in Spanish, has or had for past perfect. Questions pretty much follow the same pattern in all tenses. If we are using the verb to be, we just modify the placement of the verb to be. We put it at the beginning and that's it. Are new ideas discovered every day? Were those properties trespassed by robbers last summer? So these are two questions using present simple passive and past simple passive. Simple tenses. Then if we have an auxiliary like will or any modal verb, remember, all the modal verbs are auxiliaries. If we have any modal verb, we should place the modal verb at the beginning and that's it. Will the mission be achieved if soldiers follow the rules carefully? In this case, the verb to be is still next to the main verb of the sentence, which should go in past participle. Be achieved, be completed, be left. What goes at the beginning in this case is only the auxiliary, which is the modal verb, or will in the case of future, which is also a modal verb. What about perfect tenses? With present perfect, we position the auxiliary have or has at the beginning and the auxiliary had for past perfect at the beginning too. Then the rest of the sentence is the same. Have protests been observed through the nation? Still, this combination is kept, the verb to be and the verb in past participle. Information questions, pretty simple. We just add a WH word like why, when, or any of the others that appear on screen. If we are talking about simple tenses, then we have the verb to be, the object, and the verb in past participle, and the rest is the same. The agent is optional, the doer of the action is optional, remember, that's why this is passive voice, and then the complement and question mark. What happens with other tenses? With future simple, we add the WH word again at the beginning, then we have the auxiliary, which should be the modal verb, the object, the verb to be, followed by the past participle form of the main verb, the doer, which is optional, the agent is optional, the complement, and then the question mark. What happens with present perfect passive? For information questions, again, we add the WH word, when, how, where, or any of the ones that appeared on screen in the previous slide. Then the object, verb to be, remember, every time we have this combination, we're talking in passive voice. Alright, let's see some tips for using passive voice. Number 1, we use passive voice when the doer of the action is unknown or less important than the action itself or than the object that we're talking about. That's why on the news we see passive voice a lot. The documents were stolen. In this case, what is important in this news is that the documents were stolen. We don't know who was the doer of this action. Or maybe we do know, but the doer of the action is not important. What is important is that the documents were stolen. To emphasize the recipient of the action, a beautiful song was sung by the choir. We use the passive voice in formal or academic writing. The research was conducted in 2020. We also use the passive voice in scientific or technical writing to maintain objectivity. The data were collected and analyzed. When the action itself is more important than the doer, the city was devastated by the hurricane. And we also use the passive voice to vary sentence structure for stylistic reasons. If we are writing a scientific article or a reflection article for maybe a magazine or a journal or for a newspaper, then we need to vary our style. If we only write in simple tenses, the text would be boring for the reader. So for a stylistic style, for maintaining the attention of the reader, we should vary. We should use different tenses and complexity in the sentences that we write. And that is all, guys. I hope this topic is clear. Please let me know if you have any questions. Remember, you can download free materials in the description of this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.